Oh, hey, viewer slash listener. Thanks for dropping into this episode of The Oracles. It's me, James, and today I'm going to take you out to the northwestern corner of the state of Illinois to a haunted farmhouse. And its owner, or the occupant now, since about 2006. We're going to talk to Al Kelchner and discuss a few of the things on why he still lives there, for one thing, and what types of activity he's bumped into. Now, this part of Illinois isn't, we'll say, it isn't that old relatively to European settlement. I always say that the west side of North America, we got here late. We got here in the early 1800s. This part of Illinois, because even the American Indian, the First Nations that were there, they were primarily around the Mississippi and Illinois River valleys, because of course that's where you'd want to live. That's where you'd have the best water sources, and the water sources bring in the game bring in your own hunting and your food and your agriculture and everything. The area that Shannon is in is a place called Carroll County, and Carroll County wasn't really founded until the late 1800s, 1880s, I believe. Shannon itself, I think, was like 1860s or something, named after Charles Shannon, who was a fellow who wanted to put the railway through. So he kind of got on the council, and eventually, because it was a settlement, because all the farmers needed some place to go get the wagons fixed, to buy harnesses, a little business area developed, which he then turned into a bit of a town and put a railway station through. So they named it after him. So that's where Shannon comes from. It's now the village. I think it was up to about 1,500 people at one point in history, but now it's less than 800 in the town itself, or in the village itself. Mostly it's a rural area, and that's where Al lives. And Al lives in a house that was homesteaded back by the Boardman family in the early 1800s, mid 1800s. So it's been in basically the same family from when it started in the mid 1800s up to about 1980, same bloodline. So why is it haunted? And what's going on there? It's not an area where there's a lot of, like, even the First Nations battles. Why farmhouses are haunted? We kind of get into that. And what may be the relationship to the proximity of moving water. Now, if you've watched the show before, you've known that we talk about movement of water close to places that are actively haunted, and whether or not places are always haunted, except they're just more active when you're around moving water, or even tidal movement, or the river. And we talk about that, and we discuss the entities believed to be in the home and his methods of communication with them. And his method, one of his primary methods, is a Ouija board. So that's interesting, because I want to get into a little bit about that with them. And we discuss could some of the entities of the farm right now be connected to Al from a past life, which is another theory that Al has. And again, because of some stuff that have been seen on the land itself, could the ghostly interactions people have while on the property be the result of elemental beings? So was somebody screwing up the land? Did somebody change a water course? Did somebody block a well? Did somebody tear down a forest? Did somebody burn out an area? And did that upset the land itself? And is that what's creating this very bizarre entity that is sometimes seen on the land itself? So very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. And Al's doesn't have a website. He has got a book in process. And if you want to know anything more about this Haunted Willow Creek Farm, that's what it is on Facebook. Go to Facebook, the Haunted Willow Creek Farm, and join that group, join the page, and ask him yourself. Very easy to get along with, very easy. If you're in the area and want to drop by, sure. He doesn't charge you for paranormal investigations. He's not big on a paranormal team showing up unannounced and saying, hey, we want to go talk to your ghosts. You'd probably want to sit down and talk to Al first. But he welcomes people in. It's kind of like, I wouldn't call it an Airbnb, but I don't think, once you get to know him, I'm pretty sure he'd let you come stay the night and poke around in the woods there with him in the old shed. It's behind me on the screen here. That's what it looks like now. And if you go to Haunted Willow Creek Farm on Facebook, you'll also see a number of photos that Paranormal Teams or Al has put on there. And we're going to talk about a couple of the ones too that are up there now, of blood spots on the floor, like drops of blood that just came out of nowhere. So yeah, interesting house. From seeing the apparitions of small girls and hearing voices and First Nations drumming to blood being dropped on the floor, obviously, all the typical woo-woo stuff of things being moved. Why? And well, first of all, why the heck is Al still there? He's been there since 2006 and he doesn't want to leave, which is quite intriguing to me to start off. So I'm going to get our little alien friend Liam to crank up the intro to the show, and I'll see you on the other side with Al Kelchner from the Haunted Willow Creek Farm.
I see you found our little hiding spot in the universe. Don't get too comfortable. This is a place where you will find those with an experience that's out of this world, and possibly deep within your life. I welcome you to the Oracles with James Tyson. Lean forward and listen. We will pull you into a supernatural journey with guests from around the world, each one experiencing some of the most extraordinary phenomena this wee planet has to offer. Now, here are the Oracles with James Tyson.
Hey Al, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I am doing well. We got a sprinkle of snow last night here on the lower left Canadian coast, and it's chilly, but not as chilly as some places.
No, not at all. But it's chilly enough for me here today. We're tonight we'll be down about minus 10, 15. So that's cold.
Yeah, that's good enough. I had a friend posted, I think it was on Twitter today, that she woke up and it was minus 47 with the wind chill, and I sent her a message back saying, go back to bed, wake up in June.
Yeah, good idea.
There's nothing. When I was a Mountie working up north, that's what it was like in the winters out there. It was just, but dry, an absolute horrendously dry, freezing. So it's nice to have a little bit of snow that I know will go away in a couple of days. And whereabouts are you? You say you're about 100 and some miles west of Chicago?
Chicago, yeah. 150 miles, almost due west, slightly south, 15 miles from the Iowa border and the Mississippi, and about the same distance from the Wisconsin border. So it's far northwest Illinois, which is big rolling farmland.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. You were in what I think was, would that be before the Louisiana Purchase, you'd be in actually northern Louisiana, I guess, or whatever it was called up there. Are you in the French part of town?
It probably would have been.
Yeah.
Because, Chicago was pretty much French territory. So I don't know the really early history here. I know it from the migration of, primarily from England, Scotland. But yeah, preceding, this was, I believe, French territory.
Yeah, it was. I think it was 1803 or something that finally everything got settled, and it was
right.
But yeah, I know that area because of what I think the United States would call it the 7-Year War. And we knew it as the French Indian War. So
right.
Lots of battlefields that go back to the 1600s. First Europeans poking around there, late 1500s and things like that. So yeah, you live in an area of a lot of interesting history.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. And you're talking about an era that's earlier than I'm familiar with. I know something about the history in the early to mid 1800s of the area. Before that, but I think wasn't one of the earliest Native American or indigenous tribes here were the Illini, which is where Illinois comes from in part. And I think Illinois is a French name, isn't it?
Illinois. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. If my French, if I can remember from many years ago, Illinois.
Yeah, a lot of the names of the cities and stuff too were
Yeah.
French and then eventually anglicized, like St. Paul, St. Paul, you know, that kind of, I shouldn't even try to say St. Paul. It probably wasn't a French name either. I just,
Yeah.
in Minnesota had a lot of them. Indiana.
Yeah. Indiana's big.
Yeah, and a lot of French influence there. But that was, you know, I used to think Louisiana. Okay, when the Louisiana Purchase came up, Napoleon sold Louisiana to the Americans. I didn't know it went from the Canadian border to the Gulf of Mexico and had this chunk. And yeah, it was a good deal. That in Alaska.
Yeah.
You're thinking when you're buying those chunks. Your area, though, you've what year was your house built or the farm?
As best as we can tell, 1878. There was a loan taken out in 74, and I think it was $4,000 at the time, and we believe it was to build this house. But the people who built this house, I call them, they're part of the homesteading family.
Yeah.
But actually, the first people to live on the parcel of land that is now, I call Willow Creek Farm, was the Willis family in 1853. And they sold it to, I can't remember the guy's name, they sold it to a guy who eventually sold it to the Boardmans, Mary and David. And Mary Boardman was one of the two daughters of William Boardman and of his wife, Mary Boardman. And they, we believe, met in New York around William Boardman came over on the Castle Morrow in 1806 and landed in the port of New York. And he was listed as a swiner and came from, oh God, what was it? Nottingham.
Okay.
I can't remember exactly where Mary came from. I can't remember her last name at the moment. But we believe they met in New York, got married, and like many people who immigrated in the early 1800s, they didn't go directly across land from point A to point B. They came up the Mississippi because they were married in St. Louis. And again, I apologize, I don't remember the year, but they arrived in Rockford, Illinois, which was actually bigger than Chicago at the time, in 1836, 37. William came out here, and that would have been about a 60-mile trip one way, worked the land for a couple of years, and so maybe it was 1835, and then under the Homesteading Act, he acquired 40 acres. And from that, they purchased more property. Two brothers, the Holmes brothers, Thomas and David, came over in 1850, and they married the Holmes girls, Mary and her sister Margaret. It was Mary and David Holmes who built this house in 78.
Okay. Yeah, it's very, very interesting that they came up the Mississippi because that was, you know, that's one of the main highways from that area. So
yeah, and still is.
And it was St. Louis is the French saint that I was thinking of. The
Saint Louis.
Saint Louis was anglicized into St. Louis. Yeah,
right.
It's an amazing part of North America. I've only been to Pennsylvania, like Gettysburg, that area, and I was pretty well locked in for about a week and a half into a small area, Harrisburg to Gettysburg kind of thing.
Sure.
And I wanted to expand it and explore a little bit more into the Virginias and places, but maybe when the apocalypse is over, maybe I can. I'll head out there.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I love the idea that you're living in a place that was built in the 1800s, because that living on the western side of the continent, a lot of the homes that were built in the 1800s that are here don't exist anymore because they weren't built for lasting a long time. There, people from the east came out to make their fortune and planned on moving back. So they didn't really put a lot of effort into them, other than the
Right.
big, those great big industrial guys that came out here. They built homes out of stone, but the rest of them all just deteriorated. And so going even into the eastern part of Canada, where you can still get wooden buildings with some stonework that were built in the 1500s that are kicking around. And it's interesting. I was watching a show from it was an antique show or something, and these guys had they were construction. These guys would go in, and it's one of these reality shows, and this was a company that did demolition, and they got told they were going to work on this old house. They could take the siding off that was from the 1920s or something, and it was actually pretty good wood. So as they're pulling it off, they found an original farmhouse from the 1500s inside of the walls.
That's amazing. That's an amazing find.
The old hewed lumber. So they pulled all this off, and they realized, okay, this is a historic home, and it's somebody in the 1920s just put siding on it,
right,
but kept the original. And inside, they saw where the walls are moved around. They found this thing. It's fascinating. The fascinating stuff you could dig around out there anyway. But out here on the West Coast, old as 100 years. That's about it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm from the New York metropolitan area originally, and I actually moved from Brooklyn, New York, to Rockford, Illinois, back in 2002. So I was in the breadbasket, so to speak, of early American history from the mid-Atlantic states, well, even from southern states, the Carolinas.
Yeah.
And if you want to go back even further, like St. Augustine, Florida is the oldest city in the country. So the East Coast is rich in history. And I never thought much about this area until I got out here. And there's a fascinating history and an integral part of the growth of this country right here in the area where I live.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it is stuff.
It is an interesting area, primarily because of the British French, or the French Indian alliance. And then the British came in and screwed everything up.
Yeah.
And so the early Europeans up in that area were very, very connected to the land and moving all around that area with fur trade and poking around. Where, like St. Augustine, it's the oldest European-based city in North America.
Right.
Yeah, there was other towns, like the one that allegedly was where Phoenix, Arizona is, had 1 million some people living there. They left, I guess, after the water dried up, and that was possibly somehow connected to the Incas or the Mayans, and they all buggered off, and then Phoenix arose from the ashes of that place. But yeah, there was some pretty good sized towns. We had villages all up and down the West Coast here that were, it's crazy. We had the Haida. I don't know if you ever heard of the Indian band called the Haida from just south of Alaska. They're the Vikings of the West Coast. Those guys would go up and down the coast, literally killing all the male occupants of the villages around here, taking all their women and children and using them as slaves and trading them. It was a commodity. And they were the West Coast Vikings.
Didn't they cross the land bridge?
That would have been a few thousand years before.
Right. I'm talking a long time ago. But I thought they crossed the
Tlingit and Haida and Salish. There's a number of them, but Haida would go from there all right down into Northern California to rape and pillage and have a basic Viking kind of esque time of the thing. But your area, and what we want to talk about, is your experiences with we had a little brief conversation about this beforehand, about the term ghosts and spirits and things, and what you want to label them. And you have a Facebook page for those wanting to play along at home. It's a Haunted Willow Creek Farm on Facebook.
Correct.
And, if someone was to go over to Facebook and look at the Haunted Willow Creek Farm, you'll see posts on a number of things that are going on around there. And it's very, very interesting because, when we're going to get into this, the difference, or not the difference, but the different ways, I guess it is different ways of communication that you have with the deceased, and where you've been led to believe they actually fit in not only to this life, but to other lives, which is absolutely fascinating, Al. Give us a little bit of an idea of your experience when you first moved into this property. What types of things got you interested in the afterlife?
Started the night of the move-in.
Always.
Actually, it started before that.
Yeah.
It started just one of the things you and I have talked about are connections. And there are things happening all around us. This is my belief. And a disclaimer, I can't prove anything I'm about to share, but it can't be disproven either. There are amazing things happening around us, but I think we're too busy with our lives to stop for a second, take a breath, and notice them. So there's a lead up to me acquiring this farm, this small farm. And it started in 2000, 2001 with a lot of personal tragedies, including hit and run. I really have no business being here talking right now. Gym accident, extreme gym accident, close friends dying totally unexpectedly. 9/11, my father dying a month later from cancer, and then getting laid off and unable to find work. And I finally threw the towel in and ended up coming out to Rockford, Illinois. My thinking was I want to be closer to my dad's side of the family, who still farm in Michigan. And I was tired of the city. So I ended up with Rockford, staying with a friend who had an additional bedroom she used as an office, and we turned that into a bedroom for me. And I found employment and stayed in Rockford for a few years, and realized I was in huge farm country. I mean, the breadbasket of America was only 5 minutes outside of Rockford. And so I thought, well, it wouldn't be a bad idea to go take a look and see if I could find my little dream farm. And the connection there was vacations to my dad's side of the family farm in Michigan. But it was 2.5 to 3 years before I actually saw this place. I went to the Renaissance Fair in Bristol, Wisconsin, which is really pretty amazing. I didn't realize it was a permanent installation and as big as it was. But on the way out, they had there were 3 women sitting in front of their tents. They were fortune tellers, mediums actually. And I thought, yeah, what the heck, that might be kind of fun. So I stopped in one of the tents, and the woman began to share her impressions with me. And what I found interesting in hindsight, at the time I didn't think anything of it, but she said, "You're an earth person, but you've been away from Mother Earth for a long time. However, in the next 2.5 to 3 years, you're going to reconnect in a bigger way than you can possibly imagine. And it will affect you for the rest of your life." And in 2.5 years, I bought this place.
And this is it behind me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
Cool.
Looking very different than it did when I bought it.
Yeah.
It was, I mean, the day, I never went into the house until the morning of the closing, and people ask, or I mean, there are even comments like,
you
well,
never actually went into the house?
Never went into the house. I drove up to the property. Well, here's another coincidence, a synchronicity event, synchronicity event. But anyway, so I started looking around, and on a Sunday afternoon, I rode with a friend of mine, his parents, who were retired dairy farmers, and we looked in this area and west and north of here. And I saw one particular real estate agency that listed rural agricultural property for sale. So when I got home, I got on the internet, went to their website, and I saw some properties I thought that might be interesting. One especially was, it had beautiful outbuildings, barns, and a big old white farmhouse, and it was for $110,000. My mistake, moved the decimal point. It was for 1.1 million. So that was out of the question. But I did see some raw land. I thought I could always build a house on some raw land, and thought, you know what, tomorrow morning, I'm going to call the listing agent. So I did. She's a young woman, 24 years old, who only had her license for 4 months. I told her what I wanted to do, and I said, I am a buyer, but it's going to be a marathon. It's not going to be a sprint. She said, oh, I'll find you something. So that was Monday. On Tuesday afternoon, I got home from work, opened my email, and there from Katie were 3 MLS listings attached to the email. One of them was what I eventually called Willow Creek Farm. What I think is interesting is the date was October 31st, 2006. Coincidence, synchronicity, any significance? Oh, it's kind of strange. So I got in touch with her and I said, I want to go see this place. And in conversations I've had with other people who ended up buying a haunted location or house and stayed there for a while, they all were aware of the place, or if they weren't, it quickly made itself known to them and they became obsessed. So I drove out on Saturday after I'd gotten the listing and drove onto the property. I thought, well, it doesn't look like anybody's home, but I'm a potential buyer. Why not? Let me take a walk around. Parked the car in the drive, walked around for maybe half an hour, peeked into the house, but never went in. And I was obsessed when I left. I've got to have this place. This is it. This is my dream, little dream farm. So I went to the bank on Monday, was pre-approved for a mortgage, and my real estate agent made an offer. There was a counter offer, and on Thursday, a couple days later, it was accepted. And then we closed a couple months later because they had to liquidate some possessions on the property. And interestingly, the agent, the title company, representing the title company, and the 2 real estate agents said they had never seen it. Well, for Katie, only 4 months, but they had never seen anything sell so seamlessly and quickly. So that's an indication to me that this is a situation. It's like when you see a litter of puppies, that you don't pick the puppy, it picks you.
Yeah.
And there were subsequent things that told me that I didn't pick this place. I was brought here. The morning of the closing, my real estate agent, Katie, and I went into the house, my first time in the house. The sellers had just stopped by briefly to pick up a few things and they were leaving. And we walked around, and the minute I walked through the back door, I thought, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? I wonder if I can get out of this. It was so run down. But we walked around the house and walked into the parlor. What's really odd, the parlor was painted in a hideous blue. And I wondered, when I did a little bit of reading, if it was maybe connected to haint blue, which is H-A-I-N-T, haint.
Haint?
Blue.
Okay.
Yeah, which goes back to, I'm not sure the era exactly, but it was a way to keep bad spirits at bay. And there was overspray on the windows. It's like they sprayed the room. And I walked in there and I thought to myself, this room is evil. It's like the devil is in here. Well, that's a pretty weird thing to think.
Yeah.
But it proved to be a pretty weird room as time progressed, as years went by. There are people who wouldn't even walk in the room. It had such a negative feeling and powerful energy to it. It doesn't now, although there are still people that come to visit and they don't like the room. But at the closing, I asked if the house was haunted as a joke, and the seller got very serious. And some of this I remember verbatim, stopped in mid-sentence and said, it's interesting you should ask that. We were just talking about it this past weekend, and yeah, it's very haunted. So I asked her, well, what happens? And she told me, and I thought, well, that's pretty cool. So when I got home, I sent a mass email to friends and family and said, I've realized a lifelong dream. I have my own little farm now. And by the way, it's haunted. Woohoo. It wasn't so funny the night that I moved in. You name it. There were footsteps. There were cold spots, kitchen cabinet doors when we came in. I had friends help me move. The kitchen cabinet doors were wide open. When we came in, they weren't open. They were wide open later. Most of the people that were helping left, my friends, but one couple stayed, and she is psychic gifted. And she was very agitated and upset I talked with her in the living room at one point when we were moving boxes around, and she said, "You can't stay here. You've got to come home with us tonight back to Rockford." And I asked her why, and she said, "Well, I've never felt so much energy in my life in one place, and it's very negative. And I'm concerned. I'm worried about your well-being." And I said, "No, I've got to stay here. This is my house. I need to deal with this." Well, I was interested in the realm of the paranormal, supernatural, and I really didn't know what to make of what she was saying, but it did unnerve me some, and it unnerved me because her husband talked about things he had seen around the house as we were moving boxes and placing furniture, and he was a skeptic. But by the time he left here, he was more on the believer side of the fence than on the skeptic side of the fence. So, yeah, I'll never forget that night. I took them into town for supper to thank them, which is about a 7-mile drive one way. And we had supper, and they said goodnight and asked me again, "Are you sure you don't want to come home and stay with us in Rockford?" And I said, "No, thanks." And then I drove the longest 7 miles in my life back to the farm because I didn't know what I was going to encounter. I didn't know what to expect. And I've said this multiple times to people, and maybe I've overused the word, but I was terrified. So I pulled the car into the garage. It's attached to the back of the house, the kitchen. Walked into the room, kitchen, fumbled for the light switch and turned it on. And it was incredibly unnerving. It was just the place was really run down, and that didn't help the atmosphere, but it was dank. It was cold. It was really dark. It was oppressive. Even breathing seemed to be difficult. And you felt like there were a million eyes on you constantly. So that was my introduction to the farm.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, it was a stimulating experience.
Well, did you know, that was your first to your introduction, but over time, did you have issues sleeping at all?
No, it's really, well, I had some experiences when I woke up in the middle of the night or early in the morning. This place is strange. Everyone who's ever stayed here, and this is my 14th year here, has said they've never slept so peacefully anywhere. Crazy things happen here, but there's something about going to sleep. You rest peacefully from the minute you put your head down on the pillow until you wake up in the morning. No, I had daylight or things happening during the day. One of the more frightening experiences I had here, it was about 5:30 in the morning. I moved in here December 23rd. Strangest Christmas gift I ever gave myself. Monday was the 25th. I had the day off from work. Tuesday, I had to go into work. So I was in the kitchen at about 5:30 in the morning, and there was some toasting in the toaster. And I stood over in the corner of the kitchen at the toaster waiting for it to pop. And I felt a pain in my neck that gradually traveled down my shoulder into my arms and then around my upper body. And I thought, great. I just moved into a haunted house and I'm having a heart attack now. What more can happen? So as I stood there, the intensity grew and continued to grow until it got to a point where excruciating is not an exaggeration. It was an excruciating pain, a band around my chest, which would indicate possibly a heart attack. And at the time I was still smoking, not in Olympian condition, and it scared the heck out of me. And I yelled, "Stop it!" And it stopped. 2 days later, on Thursday, the same thing, same place, approximately the same time, happened again. And again, I yelled, "Stop it!" So that's one of the, in my first several months there, one of the more extreme things to happen. Another time I was sitting talking with a friend on the phone, and all of a sudden I heard loud banging coming from the parlor, knocking. And then I went to the front door, and then it went over my head. And my friend said, "Well, get up and find out what it is." It was upstairs above me in the master bedroom. And I said, "Hell no, I'm not going to get up." But she convinced me, "You're not going to be hurt." So I got up and I started to walk towards the door and the stairs, going upstairs, and it stopped instantly. Um, and then there were voices and footsteps and banging that were pretty regular occurrence. I would say at least once a week, if not 2 or 3 times a week. And this continued for a good 6 months.
Did you feel anything outside the house too, if you're like working out in the yard?
No, I didn't, but it's really heavy with energy, primarily indigenous people, Native American. Some
Yeah.
great, amazing things that have happened, experiences that people have had.
Is there a water source nearby?
Yeah,
Moving water? Yeah.
I caution people, don't ever buy a property on a road named Spring Valley. There are a ton of springs here. And there's also limestone quartz. The land here is really rich. It's some of the richest farmland, farmland, I think probably in the world. Certainly the county that I live in comes up every year with being one of the top 3 producers of corn product in the United States. So we've got the perfect climate. We've got rolling hills, so the water drains. It doesn't pond like it does in central or southern Illinois. I don't know what quartz has anything to do with it, limestone.
Yeah, quartz is it's energy. It's one of those energetic crystals that you find in areas where there's a lot of we'll call it ghost activity.
Yeah. And I don't know if it affects the corn, but we sure have good corn here for cows, not for people.
Oh, do you make fuel out of it?
I don't, but yeah, people do.
Oh, yeah.
Theyll heat their house.
Do you have crops on your land? Do you lease it out?
Yes.
Or yeah, okay,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, I have a situation with who's become a friend who owns a farm, full-time farming, reasonably decent size, about 4 miles from here, and he farms it.
Good.
And this year I hope to put cattle on it. I want to put miniature Herefords on it, so I can really be a make-pretend farmer.
And look, they can come in your house because they're tiny.
That's right.
Is that where you get that? You can you get those little tiny hamburgers from them, I guess. Those little.
I think so. I'm not sure yet. I'm still learning.
Yeah, my in-laws, my ex-in-laws, they have cattle farm and they grow their own feed. So they're leasing land all over the place. They're anywhere within 10 miles of their farm is, they made deals. And it's unfortunate. When I was a Mountie in northern Alberta, in an area, it's called the Peace Country outside of Peace River, Alberta, all farmland. But over time, the kids who grew up on the farms didn't want to work the farm because they saw their dad working 16-hour days and coming, just beat to a pulp and getting up early and going to bed late. And they thought, I'm just going to go work in the pulp mill.
Sure.
And they did. So the farms themselves, unless they leased the land out for somebody else to farm it, they eventually moved into the old folks' home in town, and the farmhouse was not being used. So you get a lot of people with addiction and looking for a cheap place to live, moving into them, and they get dilapidated or burnt down. They're pretty rough now. It's sad that you've turned maybe 5 farmers in an area where there were 100 farmers. There's maybe 5 left, but they're farming everybody's farm. Monster. Turn into monster farms, but it's a change of culture. Their kids are leaving town and don't want to be farmers anymore because it was hard.
That mirrors that mirrors the situation around here, and we've gotten so specialized. 30 to 40 years ago, a farm had chickens, they had beef cows, they maybe had dairy. And they had grains, crops, and hogs probably. Not anymore. It's all grain farm. Dairy's dying out, and it's cattle. And we're not big cattle here. I mean, a big herd here is 2,000 beef cattle compared to to Colorado or a state like that. But it's a shame because as you drive around the countryside, you see a lot of outbuildings, barns and sheds that are empty.
Yeah.
You see houses, a typical Midwest house, which you've got up in the background there. This is a typical Midwest house. It was rectangular, 2-story, and then as the family grew, they added on to the back, so it ended up being a T. It's very typical Midwest, approach to housing in the 1800s. And there's so many that are just abandoned and they're falling down and falling. It's a shame.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it is a shame. It's but people moved on. Why should I be a farmer when I can be a Instagram influencer?
Yeah. Well, some have moved on though, James.
Yeah.
Not everybody's moved on. Of course, some of those who haven't moved on, it's hard to see them, but
yeah, they just open doors and slam them or
that's
try to
it,
get a heart attack in the morning.
Yeah.
They don't want you using the toaster. That's what it was.
I know.
Tell me about your experiences, and I know you have 3 primary how should I call it, followers that are in the place. You have Sarah, Lily, and Mary.
Yes.
We talked a bit off air about them, and we kind of decided, you told me that they have actually crossed over and come back. They're not what I would call a traditional ghost. They are spirit energy that is positive, interactive, and there as a loving influence. Where do they fit in, like in your experience and your research in the home? And I need to talk about the Ouija board too. We'll get into that. But where did they fit in, or how did you? Well, first of all, how were you introduced to them?
I need to preface my answer by saying that they have no connection to this farm at all. And I'll get into the Ouija board in a second because it is really relevant to the story about Sarah and the girls. Oh, it must have been 8 months. Yeah, 8 months or so before I bought the place. I got an invite on MySpace. Remember MySpace? And so it was from a woman from Atlanta, and she was just surfing the internet and MySpace one day, and she saw my profile and thought, I gotta get a hold of this guy. Well, we know why now. At the time, it didn't make any sense. So I accepted the friend request. She lived and lives in Atlanta, and she had a very good position with one of the airlines. So a lot of our conversation was about business-related subjects. And at one point in time, and I think it was just after I purchased the place and moved in, but she told me that she was a medium. Okay, whatever. The way she convinced me is she told me about the property in the house. And the only way she could have known some of the things that she did and told me was if she had physically visited the property. So essentially, she did a remote reading that was really accurate and grabbed my attention. A lot of, too, the experiences and things, the knowledge I have of this place comes from mediums. And I don't immediately put faith in what I'm being told necessarily by someone who claims to be gifted. But if they say things, the first time they present something to me, I'll listen. Second time, I'll listen more closely. And third time, then maybe you really have my attention, especially if what a medium is telling me confirms what I've been told by other people, other mediums prior to that. And so Susan said that there was a woman in the house upstairs in the master bedroom. She was very specific, described what she looked like, what she was wearing, said she died somewhere between the age of 32 and 34. And there were 2 girls there too, her daughters. And her name was Sylvia or something like that, but that's not exactly it. So it didn't really impress me at the time other than, okay, that's some information about the spirits that are supposed to be here. I'm told the house is haunted. It must have been a month later when a friend of mine, well, he's become a friend of mine, and his wife came by. Joe and I connected through work, a project I was working on at the time. And he told me that she was very gifted and she had just discovered this gift over the past several years, wanted to see what it would be like and what she would feel in a haunted location. Could they come and visit? I said, yeah, sure, I don't care, that's fine. So they did one Saturday, and they spent 7 hours here. Joe and I started doing some renovation work. He was a carpenter, and Karen walked the house and spent a time in each of the rooms. And she told me that there was a woman here who died between the age of 32, 34 from the mid-1800s, which is exactly what Susan had told me. And the woman's name was Sarah. And I said, well, my friend said her name's Sylvia. And she said, yeah, that's not her name actually, but yeah, it's Sarah. And she has 2 daughters, a 4-year-old named Mary, or a 10-year-old named Mary, and a 4-year-old named Lily. And she's very sad. She told me she was really sad and explained to me that Lily drowned, but I couldn't help her. There was nothing I could do. And so she sat next to me on the floor in what I call the nursery, is actually the original master bedroom. And she told me this very sad story about what had happened with Lily. That was my first introduction to my spirit family, I call them, Sarah, Lily, and Mary. Some interesting things are that Sarah, they also told me Sarah died of some sort of like peritonitis. And still to this day, women will go into the master bedroom upstairs and they'll feel very sick, like an intestinal sickness or illness, uncomfortable, which would indicate peritonitis. Once they leave the room, they're fine. As far as how I got here, people ask me that. Excuse me. We did a Ouija board session here once. And during the sitting, I asked Sarah, was on the board, how did I get here? And the response was, I brought you, spelled out on the board. And I asked why. And the response was soul dying drunk, which really doesn't make much sense. Unless you know my background. I've got, I think, 36 years now as recovering drug addict and alcoholic, and I was an extreme case. In 2001, which was a terrible year, friends were getting married, moving out of the city, or just moving out of the city and moving on. I had all those personal tragedies that I was going through. And I wasn't doing anything. I was going to work and I was going to the gym. And every weekend I'd go up into Manhattan to Central Park and rollerblade. That was my life. That was the extent of it. I wasn't in a relationship. A lot of friends had moved on. So I didn't feel, there was no excitement about life. I just went through the motions. So there you go, soul dying. And then the other thing is, again, being an addictive personality, when you're in that place, it can be pretty dangerous. You have to be careful that you don't relapse into abusive behavior and addiction. So I think that's, again, synchronicity, connection, soul dying drunk. I brought you here. So that's just a thumbnail version of the girls and their mother. There are a lot of other stories about my health when Sarah went to different mediums and told them he's got to get to a doctor. She was really concerned, and partly about as one medium put it, who's connected to, I met at the Mid-South? Yeah, Mid-South, I think, in Louisville, and was connected to Mitchell, Indiana estate. I can't think of the name of it right now. Anyway, she said, that woman I noticed you with when we were in the vendors area yesterday and we were talking, she's standing right behind you now. And she said, you've got to get to a doctor. And I said, yeah, I'll do that. I'll take care of it. She said, she's frantic. You've got to go now. She said, it has something to do with your blood pressure and your heart. So I listened. And when I got back from Whispers Estate, that was the name of the place, is the name. I did go to the doctor, and my blood pressure was off the charts. So got me on medication, calmed things down. But I have other stories like that. There is definitely a very close, intimate connection. And I had to decide all these things that were happening. Were they really happening? Was it my imagination? And pretty early on, within the first several months, I stood in the kitchen of living here and I said, okay, I'm raising the white flag. I believe in you. You're real. Because there were other spirits here too, and there still are. And we've got to coexist. So I know I'm the guest, but we need to coexist because I'm not leaving. And so, yeah, I live here. I call her my wife and my daughters, which is interesting in a conversation because at times they'll ask me, are they're with you? And I said, well, yeah, they're with me, but they died in 1840s.
You're not claiming them on your income tax as dependents. It's
I tried. No. No. So that's a thumbnail version of Sarah, Lily, and Mary.
Oh, wow. I'm kind of always taken aback by people who use communication devices like a Ouija board for communicating with dead people, because it was indicated to me by our friend here, Karen Dahlman, who she is, that's not good. Yeah, you can't see her, but that's you and Karen with a Ouija board.
Yeah, okay.
But Karen has got a black belt in Ouija boards.
Yes,
and
she does.
She's been doing it for a long time, and I was interviewing her once, and I was thinking, oh yeah, it's all about the intent. As long as your intent is pure and good, and you're not going to invite anything in that's a little bit awkward. And and it was obvious that I wasn't supposed to be doing this, because as I was thinking during the interview about maybe doing it myself, I got grabbed by the collar and pulled back in my chair. I thought it was my daughter. I turned around, there was nobody there. I was like, okay. And I found out later it was the ghost of my dad, or the spirit of my father coming through saying, no, you're not. And it's not going to do that, because I probably am a little too scattered to focus on positive intent. So I stayed away from it. But you, excuse me, you actually use them often for communicating with those entities that exist now in your property.
Yeah. One of the things that I feel very good about is I've had people come here who were skeptics. And either they left as believers or they left with an open mind. Because my story it isn't the Hollywood, ooh, scary, demonic. It's a whole different story. It's about life after death, life between lives, eternal life. It's about energy. It's about synchronicity and coincidences. And so there's a family not far from here who have a factory that's very haunted. And for 20 years, they have lived with this. Their employees have experienced things, pretty intense things, full body apparitions, walking right by, walking into the room. And it was a husband and wife around my age and their son. And the husband contacted me and asked me through when I had a website, but how do you live with this? I said, well, why don't you come and visit? You're nearby and I'll explain it to you, what I think is really going on. So they did. And they had equipment. They'd gone out and done, investigations in an attempt to understand what was happening to them. And I said, look, I'm tired of investigations and all this stuff. I want something more. So I've been doing a little bit of reading, and the Victorians were really big on communicating. Why don't we try that? How about if we do a Ouija board? And they thought about it and said, sure, let's do that. But they came at this from a different perspective maybe than some people would. And it was the same place I was coming from, is we want to learn. We want to see what we can learn through communicating. It's not a game. It's not a toy. We don't take it lightly. We are grounded in spiritual belief in a higher power, something greater than ourselves. So let's see what happens. And we did. And for up until 2020, we were just shy of 2 sittings of 2 years of sitting once a month. And it's been an incredible experience. Our first several months was nothing but gibberish. It was garbage, all consonants, sometimes yes, no answers, and that was it. But then it grew. And our last few experiences were with masters. And if you've read any, if anyone's read Dr. Brian Weiss, I think he's probably the one that coined the term, at least the first time I heard of it, in his book, Many Lives, Many Masters, about masters. There's a hierarchy in heaven.
Like ascended masters.
Yeah, ascended masters, yeah. And so our last 3 sittings before we stopped things because of COVID, we were contacted directly by them. Up to that point, it had been some spirit guides, people like Sarah talked regularly, Lily, and I would melt every time she came on the board. We knew, because it moved a lot slower, the planchette, than it did with other people who were on the board speaking to us. But she would always spell out when she came on the board, "Hi, Daddy." So those kinds of things are hard to ignore. You know, when that happens pretty consistently, I don't have any scientific proof for you what's happening, but when the same things keep happening over and over and the story comes together and it fits, there's got to be something to it. Yeah. So it was pretty interesting having the Ascended Masters, communicating with them. And what they said is, we're paying attention to you and we've come to you because you're doing it for the right reason. And that underscores what Karen says, it's about intent. And we've gotten some really amazing stuff in our discussions, our questioning. And I think that's been reinforced by some of the books and things we've read. I'm a big proponent. I tell people, read Dr. Michael Newton's Journey of Souls, and then Brian Masters, Dr. Masters, his book too, Many Lives, Many Masters. I think they pretty much captured what I believe is really happening when we talk about dying and the afterlife.
Yeah, that's fascinating. You've talked about the 3, Sarah, Lily, and Mary, as being family. Mm-hmm. Have you had a past life regression at all that connect them to you?
Yeah. I struggle with it. Even today, sometimes I struggle with the reality of what's happening to me. Is it really happening? I know it is. But I went to a woman who is she's a psychologist and does past life regression. Mm-hmm. And she was a student of Dr. Weiss. And during the regression, it lasted for about an hour. And she recorded it. I won't play it because I'm too embarrassed. And I certainly won't play it for anybody else. But I was a farmer. And it wasn't in this century. She did the usual, well, tell me what you're wearing. Well, they were work boots. I mean, that's one way that someone who's doing a regression will try and determine what era you're talking about. Yeah. And so we were sitting in a white farmhouse. But it was a single story for some reason that sticks in my mind. And we were at a dining room table, and it was very clear to me, to my left was Lily and Sarah, and to my right was Mary. And we were having supper or lunch, doesn't matter. We were eating. And the next thing I know, I was out in the field, and it was spring or very early summer, because it had something to do with haying. And there was a big draft horse that I was so proud of. That was my draft horse, a beautiful animal. But I love draft horses. I think they're pretty cool animals. So is that significant? Not particularly. But then Sarah came running through the field towards me, hysterical, yelling, "Lily has drowned. Lily's drowned." And at that point, during this regression, I started to cry, but I didn't cry. I mean, I was sobbing, hysterical. Tears. And I don't remember much more except that she brought me out of trance, and I questioned what had happened. I said, look, I've been told these things before. Lily drowned. I've been told that in my first 6 months of living at the farm. We can't prove anything. We have no record of Lily, Mary, or Sarah living here. I have a friend who's done some, pretty extensive research, and we really can't come up with a Sarah that matches, although maybe, but jury's out. And I said, I've been told this story about Lily drowning, and I've got so many stories connected to that. It makes some pretty amazing things. that confirm there was a Lily, or there is a Lily, and she drowned. I said, but I can't believe that I was seeing a past life. And she said, well, maybe you weren't. But Dr. Weiss, I remember him telling us, if people have a very strong emotional reaction when they're in trance, chances are they are experiencing something from a past life. I don't know. I'll go with it because there are other stories that support the existence of a Lily and Lily drowning, and they're amazing stories.
When you say there's other stories of it, where do they originate?
One was a woman that I met in Rockford, actually through, I think it was through my internet page when I still had it. And we talked on the phone, and she told me that she was gifted, but she was afraid of her gift. But I think it was her grandfather encouraged her to use it. She knew that I lived on a haunted farm. So we got together a few times over supper and talked about, the paranormal and supernatural. I invited her out. She never did come out, but we were on the phone one night, and she said to me, I smell flowers in the room. It's really strong. And I asked, well, what kind of flowers? And she said, I don't know, but it's very strong. The next night she called me to say, on my way home from work, I was thinking about the flowers that I smelled. They were lilies.
Oh.
So, well, that's interesting. I said, there's a little girl here, spirit. Her name's Lily. And by the way, I've been told Lily isn't really her name. That's her nickname by some mediums. So another evening, subsequently, I was on the phone, and this woman said, oh, Lily's here. I smell lilies. Oh, okay. Well, when we're done talking, tell her she needs to go home. So during the conversation, this woman said to me, shh, be quiet. She's saying something. Lily's saying something. Oh, really? Okay, what's she saying? Shh, it's very quiet. You need to be quiet so I can listen and hear it. That's okay. And we continued with the conversation. She said, no, she's still here, and she's saying something. Quiet, let me listen intently to it. So she did. She said, Lily's saying, mommy, 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 pleading. I thought, wow, that's pretty freaky. So we continued our conversation. He said, she's saying something again. Okay, I'll listen. She said, oh God, she's saying, water, water, water. And that was all she said. But how did this connect with stories I've been told about Lily drowning? Another time, there was, you and I have talked in the past about elementals. There's one here on the property, I believe. The house has been under attack twice over the 14-year period that I've been here. And one time, actually friends did help me deal with this, but I came downstairs the weekend after the attack, which was in 2016, and in the threshold between the dining room and the living room, there was a puddle on the floor, and it was maybe 1 foot long, 4 inches wide or so, something like that. And I thought, oh, the cat's pissed on the floor. So I ran my finger through and smelled it. No, there was no urine smell. And I was baffled, like, what's going on here? Well, one of the things that told me that the house was under attack, confirmed by a couple of mediums, was there was no activity. The family was completely quiet for 4 to 6 weeks leading up to the visit by these mediums from Minnesota, who said there's an elemental here, it morphs, and that's a whole nother story, but your family isn't real. There's never been a Sarah, Lily, or Mary. It's just this elemental morphing into their personalities, which was really devastating and difficult for me to absorb and take in. So what that means, I've been living a lie for 10 years. Does that mean I'm crazy? So I called a friend who I told about what had happened, transpired that prior weekend. And I said to Kathy, I told her about the water, and I said, I don't know what this is about. And she said to me, or asked me, don't you realize? She said, Lily's there. She's telling you I'm here Everything's okay. Stretch, I mean, is that a stretch of the imagination? Maybe. But how can I explain that water? There were no leaks. There were no water stains in the ceiling, on the wall. Just this puddle of water. I don't know. A lot of mystery.
Your house is full of mysteries, for goodness sakes.
Yeah.
And again, for people who are just dropping by, it's we're talking to Al Kelchner. You can find a Facebook page, Haunted Willow Creek Farm, and it has a lot of posts about things that go bump in the night out at the farm. You were actually just telling me about some blood spots too that were. We did the forensic analysis on them. They were round, about the size of a quarter.
Mm-hmm.
So that would have to have dropped from a distance.
Exactly.
And more than just, I nicked, I nicked my finger. It has to, for a blood spot to be the size of a quarter, it's got to be a good drop. It's a droplet of like a good chunk of blood coming down.
Right.
Or else it wouldn't be that wide. But being round, that's coming straight. That's going straight down from a distance. So it's not going to come from your cat.
No, and it's not like it's a cut on your foot, which is what I thought it was. Yeah, because that would leave probably a streak.
Yeah, those are. That's just a smudge.
Yeah, one of the unfortunate, unfortunate. I don't know if that's the right word, but one of the things that makes dealing with the supernatural difficult is when something happens. It happens all of a sudden. There's no announcement. Okay, at 2:00 this afternoon, such and such is going to happen. It just happens. And so it catches you off guard. And then the result can be frequently is first the questioning begins. Did I really experience that? And there's the yes and no argument you have in your head. But if you finally decide, yes, it did happen, you don't remember the details necessarily because it happened so quickly. It just caught you off guard. You're in the middle of doing something. And all of a sudden, there's an occurrence. What's interesting about this is I'm not sure which day. I did cut my toe. I'm not sure which day it was. It might have been Sunday. It might have been Monday. But the drops, there were 10 drops in the dining room. Now, the way this house, I've set it up is there's a family room, dining room, and then kitchen. The kitchen has brick pavers. The family room and the dining room have wooden floors. So I came home on Wednesday, and again, I'm not sure, did I cut my toe on Sunday, or was it Monday, maybe Tuesday, or maybe it was Wednesday before I went into work. But I got home from work. I got home in an hour where I didn't need any lights. The sun was setting, but it was still light enough in the rooms. I could see, and I noticed these 10 drops. I counted them. I thought, darn, that must have been for me. And I thought, well, maybe it was the cats. So I ran my fingers through their fur. I felt underneath their paws, nothing, no blood, no stains, no dried blood. So then I went over, and in one of the spots, I took photos of this, I ran my finger through it. It was still wet, which means that it probably had to have happened within an hour prior to that, prior to me running my finger through it. If it happened in the morning, then it would have been dried. So I have no explanation for this.
Yeah, it's too bad we're not rich, so we could just take it and send it off for a DNA analysis.
Yeah, somebody said I should have done that.
Oh, yeah. It's easy to say until you've actually got the sample and found a lab, and the lab says, yeah, we'll get back to you in 6 months, and it's going to cost you $1,300. It's like,
right.
How about I'll just know it's red.
Yeah, that works.
I'm good. Yeah. But you send it to Ancestry.com.
I think so.
They want the cheek swab. They probably get choked when they open their little vial and go, oh.
Yeah, but there you go. Ancestry. There's a possibility.
Yeah.
It just illustrates, that story illustrates the different things that happen here. I've had people, it was voted by paranormal investigating teams, 12 years ago, as the third most haunted private residence in Illinois. Well, I'll take it. I think that's kind of silly. How can we gauge that? But the point was that teams that had come here and investigated other locations, this was a really active place, and I think that's where their vote came from. But I have had people who are really knowledgeable, have been participating in conferences and other things, and have visited here and said, no, it's really different. It's a different place because of the energy, the level of activity, and the types of activity. I mean, we had for a period, and still occasionally get it, there was a big incidents over several years regularly of shadow figures. So that was a common reoccurrence. But, you know, the blood thing, stuff like that happens every now and then. The puddle on the floor, you know, they're really different things. And I keep emphasizing connections.
When you were a kid growing up in Brooklyn, did you ever wake up and see shadows in your room?
No. No, the only thing is I did, I remember.
And Brooklyn is haunted.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I lived there most of my adult life, but as a child, I grew up 22 miles outside New York City, New Jersey. I do remember, I was really young. I think this might have been pre-kindergarten, around that age. Walking to the bottom of the stairs, it was a little typical post-World War II G.I. Joe Cape Cod that I grew up in. And my bedroom was upstairs. My father finished off the upstairs. And I would walk to the bottom of the stairs, and I'd look up into the darkness, and it was a game. I was scared looking up there because the boogeyman was up there, and I'd run into the kitchen with my father was reading newspaper, my mother cooking supper, and I'd say something about the boogeyman. I don't know what I said exactly. But I never had any unnerving experiences or odd or unusual as a child. I had a couple as an adult, and I thought about them for a day and then put them behind me, but no, not as a child. Nope.
Yeah. I had my stuff in my teens. And again, I put it behind me then. It was like, it couldn't have been what I think it is.
Right.
Years later, someone said, oh, yeah. In fact, a psychic, not knowing about all that stuff, brought it up to me. Oh, after the car accident? Yeah, that was a ghost you saw. It's like, dude,
wow.
I've never told you about. I don't tell people about that. But yeah, it's that, it's this weird kind of, someone else almost has to point it out to you. Mm-hmm. At the time, because we as humans, we either build a reason for it. Yeah. The easiest reason, which is not, oh my God, it's a ghost. It's I'm overtired and things. I drove many hours to my cousin's wedding in Alberta. I didn't know they lived in a haunted house because they were told not to tell anybody, even family.
Okay.
So I'm tired. A long drive. I go to bed. And I'm in the master bedroom, sleeping. I get up, something wakes me up. I look at the clock to see what time it is, to see how long I've been sleeping. I'm watching the minute hand on the clock going around like this. Mm-hmm. And the hours going, and it's just spinning. And I'm thinking, oh, damn, I'm tired. And I went back to sleep. And then a couple of years later, my aunt says, oh, yeah, that house is crazy haunted. This is what, she was making lunch for my uncle to go to work, and the dog starts barking from the kitchen into the living room, and she thought, oh, his ride's here early. So she walked out to look out the window. Oh, nobody's in the driveway. Goes back to the kitchen, and the knife that was in the butter or the peanut butter or whatever had splattered it all over the cupboards.
Wow.
Because the dog, when she was in the living room, the dog spun around and started barking at the kitchen, and she went in and was like, oh, okay, that's awkward. And my other cousin she woke up in the middle of the night once to see a young boy, probably about 14 years old, curled up on her carpet on the bedroom floor in his underwear. It was, but it was a doctor's house back in the 1910 to 1930s, where it's a small town in Alberta. And if you lived on a farm and you were sick, you're a young fella who had whatever disease, or sick illness, the doctor would let you sleep upstairs in the house to look after you for a day or two.
Sure. Okay.
In lieu of going to the hospital, which the hospital was way south in Calgary. But that was just an interim place, and people died there, and they were still there. And my youngest cousin at the time was, my aunt and uncle were selling the house, and a couple were getting ready to buy it, and they loved it because it was a real old, funky house. It was one of the oldest houses in town, and it was a big home. And my cousin walks up to up to the two couples, his parents and this young couple buying the house. And the first thing he says, "Did you tell him it's haunted?" And he says, "Oh no, shut up!
Yeah, right.
Quit it." Yeah, but
Well,
that was my experience. Where you're writing it off in your head is like, I'm just really tired watching the clock. Literally, it was like funny. It was actually, I'm looking at it going, oh, I must be dreaming, but this is kind of funny. I wasn't dreaming. It was really going around like in a movie.
So I have a related story. And I'm not sure what to make of it, but during my drug-addled brain days in college, myself on a Friday and a few friends did some blotter acid. And we were warned to take just a little bit of it, but no, we were tough guys and we had to take the whole blotter. Big mistake. I have never experienced, and I did a lot of trips, anything like that. But as I entered the phase where it was really peaking, I sat in a room and I had incredible hallucinations. Like the friends that I was with, their legs would detach from their body and walk up the wall and across the ceiling. And then I was looking at an alarm clock and I had that hand experience. All the numbers turned to 12 and then it spun and started slowly and faster. Once that happened, I then saw a tunnel of white light at the end of it. And I felt like there were nondescript human beings, many of them, lots of them. And I was starting to pass through the tunnel towards the white light. And I had a sense of two things. Unity, we're all one, we're all equal, we're all the same, we're all connected, and love. And I got towards the end of the tunnel, but I never quite finished my journey, and then I was on to some other hallucination. So at a conference, an afterlife conference, Raymond Moody was a guest speaker, and he Skyped in, and I asked the question, rather embarrassed to ask it, but we're talking about life after death. We talk about people seeing spirits and things like that. How much of this is in our brain? Because this was a drug-induced hallucination, and it was very similar to what people describe about that tunnel of light and when they die. So what's really going on here? I didn't get a satisfactory answer, but it's a tough question.
Just so you know, it probably wasn't what we would describe as a near death, because you cannot overdose on LSD. Mm-hmm. It's one of those fancy. That's from me. I'm doing the whole drug presentations in court and things like that. But
right.
Yeah, it's one of the drugs you can't overdose on. It's like overdosing on mushrooms. I had a roommate where we live here it's just between you and me, right? Right. Here in just outside of Vancouver, British Columbia. I grew up in about 10 minutes from Vancouver International Airport, and there was this green stretch of grass, like big median. Well, it's like maybe 60 meters wide, between the main roads going to the airport and the main roads coming from the airport. Well, psilocybin mushrooms would grow wild on this stretch. So he went out and picked a bunch one day, and he dried them, and he cooked up about a pound of them, or 2 pounds, on a steak on a Friday. And I took him back to his mother's house Monday when I had to go to work because I couldn't babysit him anymore. He had, like, you know how you get the bed spins when you're drunk and you throw up? Imagine that 24/7 for 3 days.
No. Oh no, awful.
Yeah, that was his overdosing on psilocybin. But yeah, it was bizarre. But LSD is the same thing. You can't overdose on it. So it wasn't a near death, but what it was is possibly as close as you could get to just seeing what's on the other side.
Yeah, and I think that's what interests me.
Shut the door.
Yeah, I was given a peek, possibly. What interests me is for those who are quite skeptical of the things we're talking about, there's a whole wide range of belief, and people are at either end of the spectrum. But for some people, that would be the logical explanation about the supernatural or paranormal. It's all in our mind.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it is, but some people believe that. And my drug-induced experience would support that.
Yep.
So again, more questions, no real answers.
Oh, and I've been around, well, you can imagine in my job, I've been around people who have died and come back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the look on somebody's face when they're unconscious and the EMS shows up and jams a Narcan needle into them, and all of a sudden the look on their face, other than they're really pissed off that the heroin high no longer exists, but it's a multi-leveled shock look on their face.
Mm-hmm.
What did I see that? Was I just too high? Was it blah, blah, blah? Because they are under the influence of a narcotic, an opiate, and trying to figure out what they just saw. And a lot of people who have drug addictions, this is kind of interesting, is a lot of them, I'm trying to think if not all of them, are the term right now we use is empath or higher.
Okay.
And when you interview these people sober, they talk about, yeah, I know I'm dreaming when I'm dreaming. I've seen shadows in my room. I still wake up between 3 and 4:30 in the morning. I've heard voices all my life. Then they get into, yeah, I was sexually abused as a child. I, go through all that stuff, which is all very high vibration kind of person. And they're trying to deaden things. And usually it's a result of physical, mental, sexual abuse. Very seldom. It used to be a little more than it is now, but you'd be an opiate addict because of misdiagnosed or poorly prescribed painkillers from a doctor who's not paying attention, who just says, yeah, I take this stuff and we'll wean you off of it in 6 months, and they never do. And then you just need to go on the street and buy it. So,
yeah,
so those unfortunately do happen for people with chronic pain. But the other ones we look at are, same with alcohol addictions and things like that. There's a reason that they get into that thing, which is actually, this is an entire other subject, and I don't want to get off on that tangent. Instead, but that's interesting. You're saying what you saw under the LSD, because right now I've got friends who actually take people down on trips to South America, and the ayahuasca things. And if anyone's listening thinking, I really want to go on one of those, well, do it. Take friends with you. And if the thing is only for like 1 day, do not do it. An ayahuasca experience should be almost a week long. And there's a lot of prep for it. Watch it. There's a lot of sexual predators putting these things on because it seems to be really popular for young women to go on these things. And yeah, it's not a good thing unless you've got a legitimate, organized, spiritual person doing it. In fact, if you're on ayahuasca and it makes you throw up a lot, you probably weren't ready enough to get into it.
I'd like to do a sweat lodge, but it scares me.
Oh, don't worry about sweat lodges. We actually, in training for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, we have sweat lodges.
You do?
Yeah. It's we do a whole, it's part of the whole culture of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and First Nations in Canada and things like that. But we have them in prisons here too.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so it's funny. A lot of times you go and say, oh, like, I heard someone's got a sweat lodge. How, can I go? And I'll, volunteer, like I'll give you a donation and blah, blah, blah. And some people charge for it. Some people ask for donations. And a lot of them are run by guys who got out of federal prison after doing 10 or 15 years. And they want to keep it doing it. And you go there, and a lot of the people going to the sweat lodge are also guys who just got out of, you know, their first experience was in prison. These are the more non-First Nations kind of sweat lodges, but yeah, they're around. It's kind of almost, you gotta know a guy who knows a guy. But literally, my ex went on when she was a senior reporter for a daily newspaper in Edmonton, Alberta, and she'd gone to a sweat lodge on a Cree reserve, and was absolutely blown away by it. So it's, you know, again too, that's one where you've got the energy of the person putting it on, or the energy of the people with you, is really important.
Okay. I think really what's interesting in our discussion about these types of things is there are different ways of connecting with, I don't even know what to say, the other dimension, meditation, sweat lodge.
Connecting with self.
Well, that's true. It's one of the things that I've read a little bit about, I want to read more about, and if I'm mistaken about this, please feel free to correct me, but are the Gnostic Gospels. Gospel of Thomas, Mary, Judas, and who else?
Kevin, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That was the guy.
Yeah.
But I think one of the reasons that they weren't accepted by the mainstream church, which was during the Conference of Constantinople after Nicaea, I think. But anyway, it's because these Gospels taught that God or Christ comes from within. So get to know yourself, and then you'll know the higher power. And that seems to be a belief that's across the board fairly common.
Yeah, and that's, if you perceive that, and it comes back to, well, it's energy, okay?
Yeah.
We all exist in energy. We all are of the universe. We all are of universal energy. Therefore, yeah, we are those beings that we would pray to. We're a part of them. We're all the same. Whether we're you know, little brothers, little sisters, whoever, we are one. We are the world.
Right. Yeah.
But so, yeah. So when you say that their teachings are that Jesus is within, it's almost not having to look too deep. It's just this energy and this energy are all part of the global energy. We are the same. We are connected to the trees, the rocks, the butterflies, the salamanders, whatever, the elements. We are one that exists.
Well, I think I tell people that I'm not certain that I've learned new life lessons at the farm, but I've had lessons reinforced, faith being one of them. I mean, the stuff that's happened here to me, I can accept it or reject it. If I accept it, which I've done, that takes a leap of faith. I just kind of have to go with it. And I think that's been a fascinating part of the journey, is so many different things have happened, and yet it's all connected.
Yeah.
And I can't articulate that and tell you or anybody else how, but it is. I just know it is.
And if you think, you know, going back, if you think you haven't learned anything, you look where you were 10 years before you lived on the farm, and you look 10 years after you lived on the farm, where's your head at?
Yeah.
And how do you look at, if you're walking down the street, how you look at other people and how you look at a tree or a building, how it's changed the way you perceive what's around you.
Absolutely.
So yeah, you've learned and you've grown.
Yeah.
And it's positive as opposed to negative.
Well, through the stories, this, as far as I know, is the only private residence in the United States that's open, that claims to be haunted, is open, and you and I have talked about that term, but that's open to the public on weekends, and you can come for an afternoon, you can stay overnight for an evening, or stay for the whole weekend. There's no charge. And I don't charge because I think there is something to be learned here. I know what I believe in and how my beliefs have been formed as a result of living here. But at the very least, people experience this place, especially if they have their intimate moments with the spirits, the 7 resident spirits here. Maybe it'll give them a different perspective. It gives them something to think about, I hope. And that's why I do this, because there is an amazing world around us. And I want to get away from the scary Hollywood, even though some really scary stuff has happened here. But let's put that aside. Let's get away from that and look at something deeper and greater.
Well, you say scary stuff happens there, but it's scary only because it's that fear of the unknown.
That's right.
Yeah, it's you've got blood droplets on the floor. Blood is supposed to be inside of her body. When it's outside the body, obviously there's something, a trauma to the body.
Mm-hmm.
When you see blood, oh my God, there's something wrong. Or it's mimicking you cut your toe.
Mm-hmm.
Or like, yeah, we're kind of, obviously it's not the cat. They have 4 legs. You drop blood from a distance, you're going to be little
right.
cat footprints through the blood, and it's going to be everywhere.
Yeah.
It's a reflection. It could be a, you could have a party when everyone's laughing and having a good time, and then 3 days later hear laughter. It's a reflection of what has happened, but maybe a little bit more amplified. Now, you just said there was 7 entities, spirits, ghosts in that property. Yes. Now, other than Sarah, Mary, and Lily, who are the other 4?
The first one that we met, and I'm going to do a shameless plug, was Big Mike. We met him the night that I moved in. We called him Ralph because one of the former owners of this property did die I believe on the property, and his name was Ralph. But we call him Big Mike. And one of the people who helped me, Elizabeth, who's quite psychic, she and her husband helped me move in on December 23rd. And she was the first to notice him, and she described him. And she called him a mountain man, that he's like 6'7", farmer. Subsequently, we've gotten information through the Ouija board that he died of a farm accident on this road, somewhere on this road in the late 1890s or 1880s. One of the interesting things, and I didn't record it, I still may have it, but he told us his name. It wasn't Big Mike, although he doesn't mind being called that. And at a Ouija board session, he said he was buried in the cemetery by the school in Lanark, Illinois. Lanark, Illinois is about 6 to 7 miles south, and there's a big high school there, and it's right across from the cemetery. I was afraid to go check it because I didn't want my bubble burst. Like, what if I go looking in their records and I can't find this guy's name? So I've never checked into it. Maybe I will if I can.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah, one of these days. But he was the first. And if you watch the Foreman Brother, here's the plug video, Living Dead Paranormal on YouTube.
Yep.
I think they did a great job of that. It's got right now probably 1,050,000 views. And in that video, they ask Big Mike, "Are you here?" And immediately a male voice says, "Yes." Then they ask, "How does Al feel about you?" And the same voice says, "He loves me." That's one of the things that makes this location and these people, DPs, I remember that from Phoenix, these people special as far as I'm concerned, and this location special. I have a relationship with this person. He's been told, mediums have told me he calls me his little brother. I don't know how you explain that video where he said, "I love him," because he's right. He's become a part of my world.
Yeah.
He did 14 years ago the night I moved in. That's Big Mike. There's Anna. Elizabeth and her husband Shay in 2000. I'm looking off into the distance trying to get the date right. It was Halloween 2007. Came over with some other friends who helped me move in, and we had cider and donuts and watched a scary movie. And at one point, Elizabeth turned and said, "There's a woman dressed all in black, in her early, maybe 40s, pretty woman, her hair jet black piled high on top of her head. And she's curious about what we're doing or interested," she said, "but she's especially interested in you." So fast forward, and there are multiple stories about Anna. That's her name, including full-bodied apparitions. What happened recently? She has talked with us through the Ouija board. Now the stories, I won't go into the specific stories, but Anna's very much a fixture here. Don't know where she came from, don't know her history. She's from 1910 to 1920 era. And people have seen her, described her exactly as Elizabeth did on that Halloween evening. Then there's Joe. I don't think Joe is here, but he comes back to visit. Described as African-American, looking like Denzel Washington with a fro. First seen by Elizabeth's husband, Shay, during the night of the move-in. The story is he came up here after the Civil War with a Southern soldier who was blonde-haired and had a big bushy mustache. I've been told that a few times by mediums. And he got into a fight with two guys who were beating up on a young 20-something black guy. And he pulled a knife and he stabbed one of them, and who died. And he felt great remorse about this. We were talking about spirits not moving on, and he was in the basement. And I had multiple encounters with him, never felt threatened, but I could feel his presence. And all of a sudden I would feel as though someone rushed up towards me from across the room and stood right in my face. We did with my medium friend Susan from Atlanta, has visited this property once. We did cross him over. We had some pretty interesting encounters with him using electronic equipment. And I'm told he comes and goes every now and then. He still comes back, but he's been crossed over. We talked about Sarah and the girls. There's the doc, Dr. Archibald Graham, we believe. And that was confirmed through a Ouija board session when I asked him if I could call him Archie, and he said yes. He is the only spirit that we believe has a direct connection to this house, that actually visited here at the very least back in the 1870s, 80s. When Mary Boardman, the homesteader's wife, when her husband died, a couple of years later, she married Dr. Archibald Graham from Shannon, which is a little town 6 miles to the east of here. And he shows up in the 1850 census. But after that, he's nowhere to be found. They were married for, I think, 3 years, and she died. Never hear about this guy again. Some people claim that he was evil, that room was demonic, and I did have an experience there that was really unnerving within my first month of living here. But I don't think he's evil. I think in subsequent discussions, he's pretty low key, he's not around. But people had experiences up there in that room, negative feeling, energy, shadow figures. I think there were a lot of children that died around here in this area. There's maybe it's a mile up the road, a cemetery where the homesteaders, the Boardmans and the Holmes are buried, and their children. There are a lot of children that died around here in the 1850s and 1860s. Yeah. We suspect that maybe Archibald Graham, Dr. Graham, we're not sure he was really even a doctor, but he tried to help some of these children and he was unsuccessful, and he's angry about that. And he's also, if he was a doctor, he's from the 1860s, 1870s, he's pretty stern, different era, different social norms than we have today.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I had an experience with him. I've had multiple. That's one time where I was punched early on here in the ribs. I didn't feel it at the time I was up in the room, but I was provoking. When we took a break, it was a paranormal team that was here, investigating team, went downstairs. All of a sudden, I felt really severe pain in my right ribs. And that lasted for about 3 weeks and then just went away. So that's Archibald Graham. And who am I missing? Well, Natalie comes here sometimes.
Okay, Natalie, because that was 7.
Okay.
With
well,
Anna,
Natalie
Ralph,
comes
Joe,
here.
Archie, and the girls.
Yeah. And then Anna's sister, Natalie, comes here occasionally.
Oh, probably to come visit Anna.
Probably. Yeah. And then there are, I've been told there can be up to 30 that pass through here. And I had something happen recently within the past month, and I'm pretty convinced it was just a visitor.
Yeah, and you could probably bring them home too.
Excuse me.
You can go to town and then you get a tag along shows up.
Yeah. Well, this was an interest. This is a recent story within the past, it's a month. I woke up, and I'm trying to think of the time because there were a couple of things that happened within a short period of time. But I woke up because I heard a loud noise outside the hallway. I had the master bedroom, which is where I sleep. The door was open, heard a loud noise outside. Can't describe the noise right now. I'd have to go back, and I did write it down in my journal. But the cats were laying in bed, and all 3 of them popped up and looked out into the hallway. So I said to the male that was closest to me, "What was that?" Let's go find out. And he jumped off the bed with his 2 sisters. Oh, that's a great story too, speaking of connections. Behind. And a couple minutes later, they came back. And I asked them, "Well, what'd you see?" They went meow, but I really didn't get much information. That afternoon, some people who are local to the area and they are renting a house and it's haunted, came over. And they're not really investigators, but they came over to see if they would experience anything here. Well, after supper, we were sitting at the dining room table talking, and the door of the living room was open. You could see into the living room. Off the living room was the parlor, and one of the women saw what she thought was probably a male shadow figure popping its head around the doors, the pair of doors to the parlor. So I think what I heard in the morning was a visitor who showed himself later by peeking around the doors of the parlor that evening. I don't know. It's my speculation, but
yeah,
it's a good story.
It is, and it's a lot of fun to hear the stuff.
Yeah,
all the different spooky things that happen in your house because they happen in your house and not mine. So,
well, I could send some people to visit you.
Oh, thanks anyway. We got rid of 9 that were here, and yeah, that was an advance in itself. We have Anna, or Annie, not Anna, but we have I have a little girl named Annie that is supposed to be in the property here.
Okay.
She's the one that pointed out the other 9 beings that were in the basement that we had to get a shaman.
Right, you did tell me about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was interesting. But yeah, Annie's around. Well, Annie, I was dragging my feet and getting people in to clear those other beings out, and I have a picture as a lobby card from I think the Mounties versus the Atomic Invaders. It was a serial back in the day, and
that's great.
Cards, and it was hanging up on a wall. And one day, for no reason, hit the floor. Frame breaks. Put it back together, hang it back up. Hits the floor again. It's like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if someone's trying to get my attention. Oh, I bet it's Annie. So sure enough, we clear all the ghosts out of the house, and that was fine. And the picture hasn't fallen since. So that was like. And nothing's changed other than all the dead people have left. Yeah, but Annie was probably going, look, you were supposed to clear this out, and it's driving me crazy because I'm a kid and I don't like them. So you got to do this. So yeah, so she's active, and we've asked if she wants to leave, but she's good here. And
so here's a story about visitors, not related to clearing, but my friend Joe, his wife Karen, ex-wife now, but when they were over visiting, she said that Sarah stands in the nursery, which is between the hallway and the master bedroom, because the master bedroom and dining room were an add-on to the house. I don't know what year, but typically created that T formation.
Okay.
And I'm pretty certain it had to be in the 1880s. It was before 1900. But Karen said there's a woman that stands at the foot of the drive by the bridge and talks with Sarah. She comes to visit Sarah. That was in 2007, January, February, I was told that. Fast forward to maybe 2015. There was a friend staying here. It was May. It was a Memorial Day weekend, and I invited neighbors over for a picnic, a barbecue. And there was one couple that lives down the road. They couldn't make it during the day, but they came over later in the early evening. And so we visited, and I walked them through the house because everybody around here knows it's haunted, but they had never been through the house. So they came, we finished our little walkthrough, and they came outside, we chatted a little bit, and then they went home. And when they left, Denise said to me, "You wouldn't believe what just happened to me." It's okay, try me. Well, I was sitting here where you guys were in the house, and I noticed a woman. I turned, she was in the backyard in a canvas chair, a lawn chair, and she said, "I turned towards the road, and at the bridge and the foot of your drive was a woman standing there." My immediate thought was, oh, maybe she has car trouble. But then when I looked at her again, I realized she had like Little House on the Prairie clothes on, a dress. And so I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but I thought I should get up and walk towards her and see what's going on here. As I got up and took a few steps, she just vanished. So that evening, we were in the house, and Denise was on the computer, and she was talking with a friend from Los Angeles that she had known since high school, and they had reconnected. And the friend said to her, when Denise told her what had happened, oh yeah, that woman comes from up the road. She comes to visit. She's from nearby. Her name's Catherine. So on a hunch, I looked in the cemetery records of the small family plot that's up the road. There's a Catherine Messinger that died in 1860. And this friend of Denise's said, oh yeah, she died, in the early 1860s. Sure enough, Catherine Messinger died 1860, and there's a headstone in the cemetery up the road. Now, rewind back to 2007, and Karen said, there's a woman who comes and stands at the foot of the bridge and visits with Sarah. So these are the types of things you just can't ignore. There's too much of a coincidence going on there.
Well, do you think that she knew Sarah in life?
That's possible. What's interesting is Catherine, there's no headstone for her husband or any children. I'm not sure what that's about. And I haven't put any effort into doing extensive research.
Well, when was the Civil War?
60, what was it? Started in 2 or 3 through 5.
And she died at the age of about 40?
I don't remember, James. I'd have to look.
Okay. So I'm wondering if her husband had died during the Civil War and went missing along with 100,000 other men who went missing.
Well, yeah, that's a possibility. I mean, there's a great story about Spring Valley Road, too, that a neighbor is working on a book. I don't know if he'll ever finish it, but there were 5 friends and brothers on this road who all went off together to the Civil War at the same time, and they all returned. Jesus. So that's an interesting sidebar, a bit of history. Yeah. I mean, it's possible her husband went off and never returned.
Yeah, because a lot of guys did.
Yeah.
And because, turn of the century, even if they had children, they may have died somewhere else and got buried on their own plot in another state somewhere.
Right. I just think it's interesting how from 2006, the night I moved in, or bought the place, and the night I moved in, up to today, how there are so many things that connect. which gets back to what I was saying to you about, what I say, awareness, light, dark to light, and what was the other thing? I mean, this is more than just about a haunted house. There's so much more going on here, and I think it's illustrative of what's going on around us in this world, but we just don't necessarily see it or recognize it.
Yeah, and things are, as we are becoming more enlightened to understand, there are things that we don't understand.
Yeah.
That really do exist.
Yes.
And more of us are saying it out loud in public because, they're not going to lock us up like they would have in the 1950s. And
right.
60s. It's something that is real. It does exist. And we all have different. To me, it's like interviewing somebody who's seen a car accident or seen any kind of witnessed a murder. That's a good one because it's traumatic. If you got 8 witnesses from a murder, they're all going to give you a different description of what they saw.
Mm-hmm.
The base idea will be there, but it's from different perspectives. And that's
right.
What happens when someone has a ghost in their house. They're going to tell you their story, and it's going to be similar to someone else's story, but it won't be the same, and they won't have the same interaction, and they won't see it at the same time, and it's an individual experience.
Very much so. And I've gotten caught in the trap of, for some reason or another, when I first opened this house to the public and I started going to paranormal conferences and things, it was like a competition. Is my house more haunted than somebody else's or some other location? Well, who cares? But the other thing was, here comes Merlin to visit. See if he comes in front of the computer. I also got stuck in the, and I got to tell the cat story. I got stuck in the, I'm right. There he goes. You're wrong. I know it, but you're right. Everybody has their own unique individual perspective. And even that applies to everything in life. I will tell people with no hesitation that what I have experienced and what I'm sharing is very real, but it's real for me. You can do what you want with it, but I'm right, you're wrong. It's real. Yeah, I always had trouble with teams that came in.
It's funny. I talked to Bob Lazar, who's the UFO fellow, claimed to have worked at a place called S4, working on recovered UFOs back in the day. And Bob is basically, okay, this is what happened. If you don't believe me, I really don't care.
Yeah.
I just won't talk to you anymore. I'm not going to try to make you believe me. This is my story. Take it or leave it. Don't really care.
Yeah.
What I'm kind of like with my ghost things, this is my story. I'm not going to try to make you believe it, but these are all the details. Prove me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Or try to figure out another option for it.
I have enough trouble dealing with the supernatural ghost stuff. Yeah. So I don't even want to take on Sasquatch, UFOs, etc. Even though one time I was like, that's all baloney. But no, I mean, everything I'm telling you is all baloney. So why shouldn't I believe in Sasquatch and UFOs and Barney and Betty Hill and abduction and intergalactic and interplanetary existence of beings, multi-dimensions? It's all really pretty fantastic. But I'll tell you what, from the things that have happened to me here personally, they were as real can be. So if that's, God, he is annoying right now.
And for those who are only listening to this and not seeing the video of the podcast, that's Al's cat walking back and forth in front of the camera. So, well,
that's a good segue into the cat story. Again, the connections is I had to put down a female cat I had for 10 years. Her kidneys were failing, sadly. So I called the veterinarian where I'd gotten a cat before, and I said, I want to get a black cat, appropriate for a haunted house. I didn't tell them that. But I said I'd like to get a black cat, but if it isn't black, that's fine. Doesn't matter. Okay, well, we'll call you when we have a female in with a litter, gives birth. So a month went by and I got a phone call. Yeah, why don't you come down and see the kittens? One female gave birth to 3 kittens and we think there are more. Okay. So I went to the vet's office and there they were, eyes closed, and they were feeding on mama, and all of them were black. I said, wow, well, that's pretty interesting. And when you look it up online, the probability of that happening is pretty low. And I didn't really want 3 cats. I hate cleaning litter boxes. But I thought, oh, what the heck? I can't separate them. Something, intuition, told me, no, you cannot separate them. So I took all 3. What I think is very interesting is there are 2 girls and 1 boy. It was the boy that just was walking in front of the computer. In this house, oh, I didn't mention him. There are 2 girls, Lily and Mary, that we've talked about, and 1 boy, Robert. Coincidence? It's kind of odd. Yeah, I forgot to mention Robert.
Yeah, is that one of Sarah's kids too?
No, we don't know really much about him. Although we know that there was one of the earlier settler families in the area. There was a 5-year-old that stayed in this house for a while. What we do have experience to know about Robert is that the night that I moved in, Shay and Elizabeth, her husband Shay, was upstairs in the northwest bedroom. That's where the doctor is, Dr. Graham. And he saw a sickly boy about 10 to 12 years old crouching in a corner. And Robert's been seen by other people, but we don't know anything about him. He's very quiet, doesn't really make his presence known, but he has appeared as a full-bodied apparition to people. So I try and incorporate him. If I go to a county fair and there's a tractor pull or something, I'll yell upstairs, come on, Robert, we're going to the fair. But I think it's interesting. I have 1 male cat and 2 female cats. 3 children here. 1 male, 2 female.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm going to come visit.
Please do.
And until then, I'm stuck with you on Facebook.
You are, but that's okay. We can make it work.
Yes. The Haunted Willow Creek Farm.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's in Illinois. Do not just Google Willow Creek Farm in Illinois, because you get young couples Airbnb or little open hobby farm that you can go to, unless you have 2 ghosts that have set up their own website. My God, that's my farm. And who are those people? Oh, they're kind of faded. The Haunted Willow Creek Farm on Facebook is because Al's website got hacked by actually a terrorist group from the Middle East, which is a whole other interview. This kind of funny. I really appreciate you dropping by, Al. This has been a lot of fun.
Well, I appreciate it, and I want to thank you for the invite. I'm glad that we had an opportunity. Oh, let's talk about that for 1 second. I'm glad we had the opportunity to meet in Phoenix a couple of years ago.
Yep.
When you also did an interview. But what happened to that interview? Did you erase that?
Went to the ether, as a lot of things do.
Yeah.
And I could look at the recorder and see that the green light's on, and we recorded on a Zoom recorder, and I checked it that morning and everything was working and it was recording fine. The card was empty, and like we talked for about an hour and 20 minutes and nothing got recorded to the card. Yeah, it was friggin' nuts.
One of those interesting supernatural things. But again, this farm does reach out to people, and kind of the inhabitants do what they want to do when they want to do it.
Oh,
so
we didn't talk. You have a book coming out eventually.
I'm working on it. Yeah, hopefully late this year.
Late this year.
I'm not an author. It's been a work in progress for 5 years now. I have an editor. I sent all the preface and first half page, title page and the first 5 chapters to my editor, and I'm getting good feedback about that. And then I'll be sending subsequent chapters to her, and I'm hoping we can publish this thing. I've still got cleanup to do, but I'd love to do it October 31st, which is the day I got the listing, the MLS listing for the house back in 2006. If not, maybe Christmas as a second Christmas gift. So we'll see.
Good stuff. Again, we've been talking to Al Kelchner. He lives on a wonderful property in Illinois, and please go to, if you're on the Facebook, go to Facebook and follow him at the Haunted Willow Creek Farm, and keep an eye on the activity that's out there. And if you are in the area of that chunk of the United States, and that part of what is about 150 miles southwest of Chicago, and you're a paranormal kind of person, and you can get out there during the apocalypse and mask up and go to a paranormal investigation.
Absolutely. And the contact information, you can call me, write to me. I have a Yahoo email address, Haunted Willow Creek Farm at Yahoo. And also I have my personal cell phone number. All that information is on Facebook. So absolutely. Open on weekends, no charge, public. I've gotten away from investigations. I prefer visits. Come for a visit and we'll talk about our experiences, and who knows, maybe something will happen.
Excellent. Thank you, Al.
You're welcome. Thanks, James. Bye now.
That's it. Let's roll. Hey.
Let's be careful out there.